Hi everybody, this is Stephen Pugh, City and Guilds Carpentry and Joinery course. Want to be dealing with another video. This time it's on the installing of service encasements and cladding. I'm in the trade, they're never referred to like that. They're referred to pipe boxing, basically boxing or pipe boxing. Sometimes people say casing, but I've not really heard that expression very much. It's talking about how services like pipe work, electrical work, is actually encased by timber in order to protect the timber, or protect the people, or to protect the services from each other. So we don't want to be coming in contact with certain things, and we don't want certain things to be touched. So they are encased, and it's much better to encase timber. To encase in timber things like the soil stack, the basic pipe that comes out of the toilet. We don't want that to be going down somebody's bed head in a room, so we would encase it in timber, and that would keep it well out of the way. Usually in rooms where pipes are like kitchens or bathrooms or even bedrooms, the pipe work may be in 110 soil pipes, it might be waste pipes, 40mm, 32mm, or various small diameter copper pipes. It may be electrical supply. All of these things need to just be encased so that then you can paper the wall or you can paint the wall and you don't see all the pipe work. If the supply pipes are fitted with things like stop taps, or there's particular concealed switches for electrical, then obviously there would need to be access made to those services. Obviously, we talked last time about the method of transferring datums, and that is something that comes up at a later date. So in this particular case, we're talking about encasing services. Now, in this case, we're talking about how services are just encased with timber. They've encased by them and kept away. This is something which used to blow my mind many years ago, because people told me about how they tried to make frames up of wood and fit it all together. I almost invariably don't do it like that anymore. If it's small pipe boxing, I tend to use fairly light plywood. And I also use window sill material for the top, if there is a top. If it's horizontal, it has a top, I'll use window sill material on the top. It looks good, and it makes the customers generally happy. If I'm in a bathroom and there's a lot of horizontal pipes going to be covered, then I'll just put a timber on the floor at a set distance away. I'll bring the plywood up and then put a batten at the back of the plywood. There'll be a batten on the wall to match, and then we will then just put a window sill across the top. I found that over the years, people like the look of it far better than anything else. And generally speaking, on the front of it, there will be some skirting going around. So it looks as if it's part of a sort of a wall. But the vertical ones are dead easy. Literally, it's just putting a batten on the wall on one side, a batten on the wall on the other side. Coming away from that batten then would be a small piece of plywood. I would normally use not heavy plywood, but certainly something fairly substantial, say 3/8 of an inch, or something like about, say, 10mm or something like that, maybe 15mm. So a piece of timber coming across, there'd be a batten put onto the back of that, and then you've then got two battens, one on the wall and one on the boxing, and you just cover across the front. So I would put the plywood on the surface, check that it doesn't need to be scribed to the left-hand side, and I put a pencil line down the back, and I just cut to the line and put it straight in. And that basically is it. Sometimes you have to cut around pipes. That's a little bit tricky too, but that's okay. It's something. It's one of these things where you develop the art for yourself of encasing things and making them look pretty, because it's all about the looks in the end. Sometimes you have a U-shaped pipe boxing. This is where the pipe box is going down the middle of a wall, and you've got to encase it right around on three sides. A very simple little operation there, nothing difficult about it at all. Occasionally, access panels need to be made into these places. So you might, for example, have an access panel on a pipe boxing to get to a stop tap, or you might just have a hole made so that you can get your hand in and just operate the stop tap. Sometimes you need to have access for the electrician to be able to deal with some wires that may need to be attached to the pipework. Access panels are very common, and they need to be there. Sometimes it'll be an access panel on the side of a bath. So there'll be a little door, fairly hidden away, but a little door that you just open and you can get into the pipework. Some of the new types of panels on the side of a bath are all in one, and they just have 2 screws and the whole thing comes out, and then you get access to everything. And sometimes a panel is put on and then a cup screw is put in. So a cup screw is like a little brass washer in which the screw fits inside it. What this does, this prevents the screw from disappearing into the wood and making it hard to find that screw next time. Now, bath panels are becoming a thing. It used to be that you just had a piece of wood on the side of the bath and that was it, and painted it. Nowadays, they have to be special panels. They can be made of veneered MRMDF panel, like a veneer panel. Sometimes they're just WBP plywood, planted moldings to create a traditional panel look. And sometimes they're just a softwood or a hardwood or a PVC tongue and grooved V-jointed matchboard going all the way around. There's all sorts of ways in which baths can be made to look tidy and pretty. Sometimes it's softwood and hardwood timber going around it, and sometimes it's plywood and then it's clad with tiles. Of course, it's possible also to put some in a bathroom, to put some waterproof plasterboard across it and then just tile it. And that's an excellent way of doing it too. Whatever you're doing with these things, it's very important that you have sufficient access for the plumber to be able to get in and service anything if he needs to. He doesn't want to have to rip off all your panels, doesn't want to rip off all of your nice woodwork just to be able to fix a stop tap that's dripping. This can be a bone of contention between tradesmen when one tradesman has to rip a lot of stuff out in order to get to his work. There's another thing that you need to know about when you're talking about boxing in, and it's called grounds. Now, the grounds are the things that actually attach to the wall. And in some rooms, people have framed grounds right across the whole wall. And what that does, that gives them a basis upon which to put paneling, which actually can cover unsightly walls or unsightly pipe work or unsightly electrical work. And these grounds have to be individually made. Generally, they're made in sort of an A-frame type, and you literally make them one at a time as an A-frame, offer them into place and screw them, then make another frame, lift that up into place. And you make them in such a way that the panels or the sheets that you're going to put on it fit perfectly when they go into place. So there's lots of different types of paneling. One of the ways of doing paneling is to do what I call the traditional Old English style. And with the traditional Old English style, what you've got, a little bit like the Houses of Parliament, we all know what that looks like. It's the heavy moulding of paneling on the walls. And the reason why they did them like that in the past is because there was the potential of dust and debris and broken brick or stone and dust. And so this was an opportunity to be able to seal all the dirt in and have a clean room behind it. It also gave a certain amount of insulation, okay? And it was exceptionally expensive to erect it, but it was one of those things that improved the look of a building immensely. Nowadays, of course, we have other types. We have dado height, we have picture rail height or plate rail height, and then we also have the complete ceiling height. So it depends on the different styles. I had a bit of a thing years ago in which in a lot of buildings, I would go in and they'd ask me to blank a wall off. So what I would do is on the one side of the wall, we would blank it off and we'd plaster it. But on the other side of the wall, because the door was invariably sort of 12 inches thick or something like that, we would turn that into a little mini cupboard. So there'd be lots of paneling involved, and there'd be a light and there'd be some glass shelves, and the light would shine down through the shelves. So it was able to take something that's a natural feature like a doorway and turn it into quite a nice feature. There's other types of paneling. Some people do a lot of paneling in their houses, but they do it in a modern style. So they will use modern timbers, and they'll use modern panels, and they'll use modern plywood, but they end up with what you would call a paneled building. These buildings can look particularly good. They can look good. And of course, the paneling subject goes into all sorts of things. It goes into things like how windows are paneled out. So in some houses, you see, especially in the old houses, if you get opportunity to work in the old houses, you can have panels at the side of the windows that come out and fold right across, and they form a barrier between the inside and the out. This was a temperature barrier. This gave insulation to the building. It could be used to shut out blazing sun. It could be used to keep in the heat in the winter. And so these panels that were on a window were a great feature. People liked to have them, but they were expensive. That's the point. So they were expensive to fit. It is possible also to have like a panelled and coffered ceiling. So what you've got on a panelled and coffered ceiling is beams going across and cross the other way. And then in between the beams, there would be panels set in. This is very pretty, okay? And one of the things that we need to understand is that some people like to have their houses boarded out. What I mean by boarded out, they use match boarding, and they either take match boarding up to the dado, or they take it right the way to the ceiling, and sometimes they'll panel at the ceiling as well. And you just have to be a bit careful about this if you're going to think about doing it for yourself, because sometimes the paneling can become very dark looking. Well, it's very white when it first starts, especially whitewood. It's very light and white, but in time, the ultraviolet light reacts with the timber and makes it go quite dark, and that can be quite overbearing. Depends whether you like that sort of thing. One of the ways in which we need to understand how paneling is used is that we need to measure when we're going to be ordering the paneling. We need to work out what the height's going to be. So, for example, if you go into dado height, you've got like a 3-foot height. Well, then you just need to figure out how many of those you'd get out of a particular length. You also need to work out how many you would need across a wall. So once you've worked out how many you need across a wall, and you can do that by working out how many you need per meter and then multiplying how many meters you've got. So once you've worked out how many you need across that wall, you then do the same across this wall, because that's going to be the same. And then you do the other wall, and then you just multiply it by 2 again. So you can get then quite a good figure as to how much overall linear length that you need. And once you've figured out that overall linear length, you then add about 10% for offcuts and for boards that have just got a crack in them, boards that have got a nasty knot in them. These are all the things that you need to be weeding out. What you do want to be doing is you want to be bringing the cladding, the boards into the room probably at least a week before, especially if it's a house where the windows and the doors are sealed and the roof is sealed and it's dry. It needs to come in and condition. This is a basic fault people have mainly. They order the material. It comes from a builder's merchant that's got racking exposed to the sun and the rain and the snow. So it's quite open. So the moisture content is quite high. They bring it into a very dry space, and what happens is it shrinks, and as it shrinks, so it creates gaps. And of course, we don't want to be doing that. So the best thing to do is to condition it, and conditioning means to bring it in and to let it get used to the moisture content where it will eventually live. These are little tricks that we use. And there's another thing about paneling. We used to do an awful lot of hardboard paneling years ago, and some people still do it today. And if it's the simple water-based panels, the thin water-based panels, they're about 5 millimeters thick, 4 to 5 millimeters thick. Is what we would do is we'd take them out onto the lawn and we'd cover them with water, just buckets and buckets, and we would bring them in, not dripping, but we'd bring them in wet, and they'd all be attached to the wall, and they'd be fixed and nailed with 100 nails aboard, and then the timber would shrink. The effect of that, or especially if you were paneling or if you were covering a floor, an uneven floor, you'd bring them in, wet and let them dry. The effect is they would then shrink themselves tight. If you put paneling in like this that has not been conditioned or has not been previously wet in order to expand it, then what will happen is it will bow. And as it bows, so it will create ripples in the surface. There's an awful lot of things that can go wrong, aren't there, on something like this. Cladding is another thing that we need to know about. It comes in the overall subject of that we're dealing with today. Cladding is what goes on the outside of a building, or on the outside of a shed, or on the outside of a timber building. And it can either be vertical boards, or it can be cladding that goes sideways. Very often they go sideways. Occasionally they go vertical, but mainly sideways. And the whole idea with cladding is to shed water. So a board goes across that, and the next one goes above it and overtakes, and the next one above it. When the water comes down, it drips off the first one. It cannot climb back up onto the inside. So it drips from the first one to the second one, the third one, and the water is constantly moving downwards. So you get feather edge board, okay, and you have shiplap boarding, okay, and you have board on board. So this is where you have, generally in a vertical position, you have vertical boards, okay, and then you have vertical boards put in on the gaps. And what that does, that helps to seal those gaps. Okay, so that's cladding for you, and there's lots of different things we could talk about: interlocking, splayed grounds. We can talk about screw and slot fixing. Screw and slot fixing. Screw and slot is where the screw is put in, not into a circular hole, but into a long hole. And when a screw is in a long hole, it has the opportunity to move. You see, timber's always moving. When it gets wet, it will expand. When it gets dry, it will contract. We need to just be aware of moisture content. I'll tell you a funny story. Many years ago, I was asked to make a garden gate for a friend of mine. Great, easy thing, easiest thing in all the world. I made it out of really nice dry timber that I got in my workshop. It looked pretty, it looked beautiful. I fitted it and everything was fine. They paid me, I went away, nothing more was said. Then I had a phone call. Stephen, your gate is sticking. Pardon? It's sticking. I don't understand why, but it's sticking. So I went along, and sure enough, the gate had expanded. So I planed a lot off, and it was hard work, but then I finished it and I went away again. And then another 2 weeks, it's still sticking. I went back to that place 4 times. That timber kept growing and growing and growing and growing and growing as more and more moisture went into the timber. So it kept expanding. So that just shows you need to condition your timber to be as near enough when it's put in to how it will be eventually in its natural state. So if it's going to be in the pouring rain, don't put some dry timber in. The other way works just the same as well. I remember many years ago, I had to repair a small chair, and I noticed in my yard that there was a little leg. It was in the corner of the yard, and I took it in, and I let it have sort of a day in the dry. But it wasn't dry, it was actually wet through. And then I fixed it to the chair and everything was fine. And do you know what? That chair rocked and rocked and rocked and rocked because it kept contracting in size. It also contracts in length. So it was a click, 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 click rocking chair. So there we are, you see. So timber has a moisture, and we need to sort of understand the moisture and work with it. Okay, and we don't put wet things into dry circumstances, and we don't put dry things into wet circumstances. We just match it to the environment in which it's going to be. There's lots of ways in which screws can be hidden, okay? But the most common is using a pelleter. So this is a special type of drill that when it drills into wood, it drills around the timber and leaves a little plug in the center. And then what we do, we pop the little plug off and we drill a hole, we put the screw in, and then we put the plug in behind it with a little bit of glue. And that, if you can orientate it the right way around and cut it off flush, you'll find it very difficult to find out where the screws eventually went. Brilliant, amazing. It's an amazing skill to be able to do that. We used to make lots of furniture years ago. It was all screwed, but it was all pelleted. and it was all plugged. And so therefore people used to say, well, where's all the screws? Well, the screws were there. They were right in front of them, but they were covered by real wood of the same wood and also from the same place. So therefore they matched perfectly. Now there's lots of tools and fixings needed for cladding. Obviously, you've got all of your basic tools. You've got your hand tools. You've got spirit levels, your levels. You've got your hand tools, your saws. You've got the shaping tools for sheet material, hand saws, jigsaws. All of these tools. They're all going to be in what call your common hand tool set. And I remember when I was a carpenter in the very earliest days, I had a foreman, and he had a little bag. It was a bassin. It was a canvas bag, but in that canvas bag was every tool he needed to do joinery ever. Joinery in the workshop and also site joinery on the site. And what he couldn't do out of that bag was amazing. He could do everything from that one bag. But there are, of course, lots of other facilities available. They've been available for a long time. 110 volt drills and tools, miter saws. It's becoming much more common nowadays to have lots of battery tools. You can have circular saws that are battery. You can have planers that are battery. Nail guns, of course, powered either by electric or by battery or by gas. I have a nail gun that's powered by air. So, these things are all available, and they're all great, and they all have a place. So there we are. Now, next time we come, we're going to talk about the installing of kitchen units and worktops and fitments. So we look forward to seeing you then. Have a good day. Bye for now.